America is our collective home. What are the features of the house that is the United States? What would the United States look like in my ideal world? It would certainly not look like what it looks like now. The polarization that we feel is definitely a moment that I have not experienced before in my lifetime. So I wanted to express that through really subjective choices of objects that were symbolic of either individuals or moments in the history of the United States, and create just a selected room that represents our home in the United States, our collective home. Victorian scrapbooking tradition of creating miniature houses just really sparked me, and I started thinking about that way of processing information and thinking about objects and space.
The paper doll house, which had various names, scrapbook album, scrapbook house, book house, was literally a book or an album. Images of things in a house were pasted in it, creating a kind of a house. They were created with scraps, printed material that was typically colorful. And it was the new abundance of advertising materials that really allowed this to happen, because there was suddenly this wealth of material that could be cut out and pasted, and sometimes very creatively. So you had a book that was a world, and then it could be closed up like you close your front door of your house, go away, and then you open it again. And these were ostensibly all made by little girls, but the evidence indicates that often they were made by adults for the girls, so that they were actually not just a child's pastime, but an adult creative endeavor as well.
The first thing that I struggle with in the process of making House Album is knowledge of my privilege to choose these objects as symbols of individuals or events, and that I have been generously awarded a residency from the Alturas Foundation to actually facilitate and create this amazing work that I would not necessarily have been able to do without their help. House Album is composed of photographic film in between two pieces of 1/4-inch thick sheet glass. In addition to that, there are hand-sculpted glass objects that reside at different points within the composition. One of them is Edison's last breath, which is actually an interpretation of an actual object. So in this case, purportedly, the original has Edison's last dying breath that his son capped at his bedside. That belief system that surrounds that object could not be passed by and overlooked. The expansion and contraction of ideas, I just felt like the breath was such a great metaphor for his life's work. My hope is that the audience will be provoked by certain objects within the installation, and then go down the rabbit hole where those objects came from and what they represent.
The objects that are represented here in glass and vinyl are standing in for sets of ideas that swirl around those things. So whether you're looking at, Thomas Jefferson's Campeche chair created by John Hemmings, who was enslaved, or something like the peregrine white cradle, which is very much a story of settlement and colonialism, this object brought over on the Mayflower. We can think about how those objects connect to these bigger ideas. Then we also have the ideological history of a period room, helping us to imagine an historic space in which not just things are displayed, but ideas are displayed. Then we also have this idea of a house album, of a scrapbook house in which mainly young women would cut up magazines, cut up catalogs, find images, put them together and collage a space that might be their dream house, a space that might be a home they would love to play in or experience or imagine for their futures. So we have those different rhetorical strategies that all come together in House Album. But what's so powerful about the objects that are brought together in glass and vinyl is that they're not all from the past. Some of them are brought from the past, some 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century things, but also 21st century things. And these objects are brought together in this collage, in this scrapbook album style installation to help us understand how the past, the present, the future are all layered onto each other and are indeed always present in this album.
In House Album, I'm drawing a parallel between the ways in which we process information at the turn of the last century and the way that we interpret and process information today.
In the 19th century, there was this amazing flowering of new print material. Suddenly you could have things in color for cheap. New photographic processes that gave everyday people the ability to have an image of themselves taken, something which had been a great luxury earlier. This new visual world of the second half of the 19th century provided great opportunities for individuals to try to make sense of that world. Opportunities and challenges, really.
We all choose to engage in the technological kind of world that we are now surrounded by and completely embedded in.
You might think about this whole array of visual sources in front of you and bring them together in your own way, whether it's through a scrapbook album that you might create, whether it's just through collecting images, filling your home with images. And in the last couple of decades, and especially now, there's a new array of visual and material sources available to us. Through a wealth of online images, through a wealth of online videos, the whole world is now brought to us through our screens, through our computers.
You are actively choosing to figure out how to navigate these kind of awesome and like almost unanticipated wonders of technology that have totally shrunk our world and blown it open simultaneously.
And we're trying to find new ways to edit and make sense of those digital sources, those digital images. But we can really think about this present moment as in some ways being analogous to that explosion of images that we saw in the 19th century. So we can think about some of those interesting technological parallels as we understand the history and creation of House Album.
When I think about the tradition of Victorian scrapbooking, it really afforded individuals at that time to just process this onslaught of information and to find ownership over it. Art is a tool for me to do that now. It's the discipline that I engage in every day, and it's the way that I can process the world and understand more.
Deep play is really focused attention. And it's when people talk about getting in the zone where you just get inside something deeply enough that sometimes what's around you kind of fades away. It's involving not just your mind's attention, but your body attention if you're doing something like arranging something or cutting or even just looking closely at what you're doing. I think that's part of the deep. And the play is, what is play? It's making a world. It's arranging things the way you want or pretending the way you want or creating a game. We want to make and play with our environment and deal with our environment. And that it's part of what makes us human and what makes us humans who have a full embodied experience. We are maker beings. To ignore that is to ignore a part of ourselves.
I'm constantly analyzing and researching the human condition as it pertains to where we are as a species right now and how that's changed or not changed over time. So I'm using history as a methodology to explore different points of time in history and also the entire idea of time. Deep time being the entire human body. The age that we are living in now would be the tiniest little fraction of the very tip of your fingernail. For me, the exploration of deep time and understanding what that means has really given me a different perspective about my own mortality, my children's mortality, my family's mortality, the society's lifespan, human species as a concept and a reality. this whole history is just one small blip on the cycle of deep time. I think the fear of failure and the fear of becoming irrelevant is actually a really good tool to continue to push oneself, to continue to take risks and to be relevant. This is my only chance to really do what I need to do to find things out. I think I'm most interested in history because it provides a narrative for an understanding of who we are and what we are and where we are. House album is a metaphor for how we think about our community, our government, the way we think about ourselves, as well as our literal homes. What has come before foretells what comes. Always.